Moving overseas now, Iranian officials have cut off internet and phone service for the country in an attempt to curb protests, which escalated overnight. Thousands of people flooded the streets across multiple cities after Iran's exiled crown prince urged Iranians to make their voices heard. The protests started over worsening economic conditions.
Isn't Reza Pahlavi a CIA plant? I remember reading about him in declassified CIA docs going down a well vis-a-vis the coup on Mohammad Mossadegh. He is, but like, so was his dad. He's not a CIA plant. His whole family lineage is CIA. But so like this isn't like a new game or whatever. They've been doing this one for a while, you know?
Grown to include calls for regime change. Dozens of people have died and more than 2,000 have been detained in the demonstrations over the last 2 weeks. This morning, Iran's supreme leader vowed he would not back down. He also accused President Trump of inspiring the protests. Meanwhile, Trump has threatened action if Iran kills protesters. Samantha Vinograd is with me now to discuss. Sam, it's great to see you. Can you set the table for us and talk about exactly how these protests began and why they've escalated so quickly in the past few days?
Sure, and I think it's worth putting this in context. Iran is no stranger to protests. Protests have been omnipresent across Iran since its inception. However, these protests do feel different, Ouija. These protests started really by the bazaris, by the shopkeepers, who started protesting over rising prices and economic conditions.
It always comes down to that, man. It literally does not matter what happens in your country. The only line for like 90% of people is, can I afford bread? And if you can't afford bread, then we're going to riot.
Inflation is around 42%. The rial, the currency in Iran, has tanked. Purchasing power is horrible. These protests started, they quickly spread across the country. More folks are getting involved, and they have evolved into calling for political demands as well, including the overthrow of the 86-year-old supreme leader. At the same time, this feels different, not only because the bazaris are involved, who've typically been supporters of the regime, but also because Iran is just in a different position geopolitically than it was before. Syria has fallen. Iran was attacked by Israel and the United States. It is less strong than it was before, and the regime so far, relatively speaking, for now, is being less heavy-handed than they have been in the past.
For example, in 2022, when we saw probably one of the biggest widespread demonstrations in that country. Moving forward, what is the big difference in terms of the plate of options they have to curb these protesters compared to, 4 years ago?
Well, in terms of alleviating the underlying drivers of the protests, the economic conditions, their hands are tied. They are under crippling sanctions because of their nuclear program, support for proxies, and more. And the only pathway to lifting those sanctions is really some sort of nuclear deal with the Trump administration. So we'll see if this in any way does kickstart more of a dialogue with the United States.
Yeah, that'll fucking do it. Oh, I'm sure Trump would be more than willing to lift sanctions on Iran. All they'd have to do is agree to a nuclear program deal. Oh, I'm sure. Man, I really wish they were able to get that nuke.
United States. But what many of us are watching for is whether the regime does heed President Trump's warning that he will respond with lethal force to help protesters if Iran engages, if the regime engages in more violence or not. So the next couple of days are going to be incredibly instructive.
And the president has many times in recent days said that Iran would be, quote, hit hard if they continue to kill protesters. Can you talk about what
imagine that. Imagine living in a country where the government kills protesters.
Precedent is for U.S. intervention in a situation like this?
Well, I think it is.
Do they have ICBMs or just nukes? Neither. Also, ICBMs are higher up in the tech tree than nukes.
Notable that the regime has reason to believe that Trump means what he says. President Trump has struck Iran before. They know that he has both the intent and capability to launch operations within Iran. They know that Israel was able to assassinate senior officials within Iran. So they know that they could be at risk if they don't listen to what President Trump is saying. And I think that is likely giving them pause in terms of how they choose to respond to these protests all across the country.
And the president's last reaction and...
To be fair, the Iranian government kills protesters by the hundreds. To be fair, the Trump administration would be doing that right now if they thought they could get away with it. Like, the only thing keeping the Trump administration from just mass executing people is the fringes of liberal democracy holding this country together. It would be death camps if it wasn't for that.
Action on Iran is still very fresh.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Sam.
I would rather Iran continue to be ruled by the fucking Ayatollah than be some cucked out Western-controlled pro-Israel regime. If only there was a third way. If only real democracy was on the table.
So Iran's in big trouble, and that doesn't mean boots on the ground, but it means hitting them very, very hard where it hurts. I just hope the protesters in Iran are going to be safe, because that's a very dangerous place right now. And again, I tell the Iranian leaders, you better not start shooting, because we'll start shooting too.
FYI, Iran does have an ICBM. No, it doesn't. I'm almost positive that it doesn't. ICBMs are insanely expensive. They might have long-range missiles, but they definitely don't have, like, ICBMs are like, they're essentially like space rockets. You might, like, it's like having the fucking Challenger shuttle or whatever. You know, they're really big.
Well, as we approach 2 weeks of deadly protests in Iran, President Trump issues a big warning to its leaders.
It comes, as the Wall Street Journal writes, this may be a rare moment when revolutionary change is possible. The fall of a regime that has spread terror and mayhem for 47 years would be earth-shaking. This is an opportunity, call it an obligation, for the U.S. and the world to rout.
Doesn't North Korea have ICBMs? I think North Korea bragged about developing an ICBM, but I don't think it's real. Like, I think that they boasted about it, but I don't think it works. They're just really, really, really complicated, man. Like, nukes are pretty simple. You shove a bunch of the spicy rock into a metal crate, and then you put a little trigger in there, and you make sure it's surrounded in a big casing, and you've got it, man. It's simple, easy peasy. You could do it in your backyard. ICBMs are, you know?
To the side of the Iranian people.
River.
White House correspondent and the brand new anchor of Fox News Live, Aisha Hasni, joins us now. First of all, congratulations, and
Thank
so great
you.
to see you this morning. So, you know, you really do, following all of this stuff
Tell that to Oppenheimer. I could be wrong, but my understanding is that, like, the big difficulty with the Manhattan Project wasn't necessarily that making a nuke is difficult. It's that it was all untested physics, and also it was really, really, really difficult at the time to enrich uranium at the speed they needed to build a bomb. Like, once they knew for sure the math, because when they were working on the math, they were like, we're kind of pulling at the fabric of reality here a little bit. Like, we're pulling at the thread of the universe. But once they knew that it worked, like, the actual physics of building a nuclear weapon isn't that complicated, you know?
going on in Iran over the last couple of weeks, you really do get the feel that something different is happening this time.
Yeah, it's hard, right, when we live so far away to really understand what's happening on the ground in Iran, and these videos that are coming out thanks to Starlink, Elon Musk's Starlink. We're getting a picture of it. And I spoke to an Iranian-American friend just a short time ago, this morning, who has a ton of family in Iran right now amid this blackout, trying to reach their family. And she said, look, this is different. And
you
it's
guys
not
know
just
Starlink is like fucking 80% of the satellites in low orbit or whatever. Like Starlink makes up a significant percentage of how many, like the total number of satellites up there. Holy shit, really? Yeah. No, it's like all of them. Not all of them, but it's a lot of them.
blind hope. She said that the system in Iran is under way more pressure than ever before. Number one, the reason is President Trump. President Trump's recent comments about getting involved. We don't know what that means.
I know you
yet.
prefer something else, but saying you'd rather committee stay in power sounds really bad in campus. I genuinely think that the Islamic regime in charge of Iran right now would be less destructive than an Iran that has been made to bend its knee to America and Israel. I think that version of Iran would be far more destructive. I think that just in terms of long-term geopolitical harm, like in a broader kind of consequences down the road sort of way, but also in a like what they would immediately enable kind of way. Having what would effectively be a second Israel set up, like a complicit administration in the Middle East, would enable us to do horrific things, absolutely horrific things. Also, it would create like 50 more ISISes. Listen, ISIS got ass mad that we invaded Iraq. Bin Laden got ass mad that Saudi Arabia was working with the Western powers, how mad do you think the Islamic extremists would get if Iran fell to us? That's like the big one. The big, real, like, Jesus Christ. Fucking mega ISIS, hyper ISIS. Holy shit.
But neither does the Ayatollah. And we just saw what happened with Venezuela, and we've seen what Trump has done with Nigeria. Second, Operation Midnight Hammer. We all remember this. Massive operation. It put Iran on the defense.
Why are we assuming if the Ayatollah was thrown out, it would be a U.S. puppet? I don't think it necessarily would. I'm saying that if the option is between those two, I think the Ayatollah is preferable. Obviously, like a, robust secular democracy would be the best option.
Capable their intelligence and their military is. And number three, every other protest so far that we've seen in Iran that has broken out in this massive way has always been about human rights. You'll remember that uprising around Mahsa Amini. This one is different. These protests really started off in the bazaars, in the markets, which is saying a lot because the merchant sector there is usually very supportive of the regime. So this is really an economic uprising. The population sort of waking up, fed up that the system is not working out for them. And the other question is, what would happen to the Ayatollah?
Well, and so to that point, the Ayatollah Khamenei is issuing some bluster. But before I get to what he said, you're right. So this starts weeks ago when the currency was devalued tremendously on top of 42% inflation in Iran. But what it's turned into now with protesters, hundreds of thousands rising up from Tehran to Mashhad in 180 cities and 31 provinces is remarkable. And perhaps that's why Khamenei is feeling such pressure. He says this. He wrote, "The Islamic Republic will not back down in the face of vandals. Trump should know that world tyrants were brought down at the peak of their arrogance. He, too, will be brought down." To your point, Aisha, you're so right. In 2009, when they rose up, it was Barack Obama behind the resolute desk. Today, it is Donald Trump, who has shown that he will act.
They have a serious water crisis that won't go away anytime soon. Well, okay, listen, in this respect, they're like 5 years ahead of the rest of us, okay? That's not going to be just an Iran problem for long.
Absolutely. It's a different world. And I think that world leaders are paying attention and responding in a big way. And that's what my friend told me, that the Ayatollah has to be afraid of what President Trump could or could not do when he says he's going to get involved. What does that actually mean? And so she's saying that her family is hearing reports over there that he might be looking into running, into leaving. And so let's imagine that scenario.
Dude, he's like 1,000 years old and he's a religious leader. I really don't think he cares that much. Yeah, he's an 86-year-old religious zealot. I'm pretty sure that if a bomb fell directly on his house, he'd be,
If that happens, are we looking at a power vacuum? I mean, what happens to Iran? Think about how widespread Iran's tentacles are in that region. It funds so many different proxies all over that Mideast region. You're talking about a total overhaul of the system in Iran if you want to see real meaningful change. And there is an opposition leader, the prince, the former prince, Pahlavi. He wants to lead a transition, but my friend's telling me we're not sure if the people of Iran want that either. I'm hearing that the Iranians really...
Holy shit. Fox and Friends is not Fox and Friends. Morning Fox? Which mini segment are we on? Are being less pro Shah than fucking Associated Press. I'm telling you, for 3 straight days, every new headline from the Associated Press website on the Iran protests was that this was like about the Shah,
Want elections, they want to vote.
Yeah, well, they haven't had that in a long time. Yeah. Aisha, we're so happy that you're going to be the new anchor of Fox News Live from 12 to 2 p.m.
Yeah,
Tell us a little bit about it.
Well, we're going to get into Iran today with Senator Tom Cotton. I have him in the 1 o'clock hour. We're also going to get into what's happening in Minnesota and all of that on the ground against those ICE officers. We're going to talk with Majority Leader John Thune. And then we're going to have the Ruthless podcast guys on as well to break it down.
People must remember the Shah is the reason the Ayatollah got into power in the first place. Yeah, of course. But the story plays out a million times, right? Western colonialism ends up inspiring reactionary nationalist blowback that ends up making those countries worse than they would have otherwise been. It's the same story over and over and over and over again, you know?
Tehran in flames as protesters chant, "This is our final battle." Smoke and fire engulfed the
Damn, they're really getting up to it out there.
mosque in the capital. Thousands took to the streets despite an internet blackout that has sparked fears the regime will initiate a bloody crackdown now that there's less chance the proof will reach the outside world. It was another night of mass rallies across Iran as the protests show little signs of stopping. The son of the former Shah, Reza Pahlavi, hailed the magnificent turnout and called on all Iranians to mobilize.
What if we tried popping up an existing regime for once and encouraged them to liberalize? It sounds so stupid, but I truly believe this, that if we had just worked with the Afghani government after the Soviets pulled out, right? After the, the Mujahideen, everything, right? And we had just traded with them and encouraged them to liberalize, I 100% think that by now people would think of the Taliban as like a slightly reactionary wing. Like I genuinely think it would be more liberal than Pakistan. We're talking like not quite like Turkey, I think, but it would be relatively okay. Like you have to create conditions that incentivize good governance, which we have certainly not fucking done in Afghanistan.
Our goal is no longer merely to come to the streets. The goal is to prepare for seizing the centers of cities and holding them.
The protests were triggered in late December by Tehran merchants angry about rampant inflation, but they've now morphed into massive anti-government demonstrations.
Bosch, no, remember China, no. But the thing is, it literally worked with China. The normalization of relations between America and China during the Cold War, Nixon opening the world up, literally did contribute to both economic and political liberalization within the country. That literally happened. In fact, the authoritarian shift in China over the past 20 years literally followed the arbitrary decision for American leaders to villainize China because they had become a dominant manufacturing base and we needed a new global enemy in the post-Soviet era, right? Like literally China and America in like the year 1999, we were fine. We did not talk about each other like we were enemies. We weren't like best friends or anything, but we were fine. And then during the Bush administration, they were like, well, how are we going to, justify domestic surveillance and military spending if we don't got a big enemy overseas to threaten people with? And they decided, I'm serious, you can read on this, arbitrarily, they were like, well, what country should be the next big bad? Cuba can't do anything, really. Like Russia is neutered, like the Soviet Union collapsed, So what do we decide on? And they decided on China. And following that, us incorporating China into this, the axis of evil, this big wing of evil countries, arbitrarily, like alongside Iran or whatever, again, for no reason other than because we needed a big, like economically powerful threat to pick on. Now, China's leaning more authoritarian. Don't get me wrong, they were beforehand. I'm not saying we invented authoritarianism in China. I'm just saying that, like, there is no denying the fact that the fascistic tendencies from the CCP have escalated since the turn of the millennium, and I really think a lot of that is because we've created that oppositional relationship. Like Xi Jinping is more authoritarian than Deng in a lot of respects. Are you saying we were less anti-China before Bush? We weren't anti-China at all before Bush. Like we really weren't. Like we thought of China as an ally that assisted us because they shifted towards us and away from the Soviet Union from Nixon. Like it was a massive shift. And this was admittedly, this was actually a huge dub from Nixon and Kissinger, right? Like actual fair credit here because they did a big one with this. But like nobody thought it was possible. China and America literally went from being like blood enemies to working together. Now, I'm not saying that it was good that they worked together against the Soviet Union. I'm just saying that like the degree of cooperation there was not expected. Nobody expected that shit. But we did it, and then we threw it the fuck away. We had something beautiful, and we threw it the fuck away for no reason. We just wanted an enemy. We just wanted the bad guy. China and the U.S. worked together to back Pol Pot. They shared intelligence. Yeah, being the good guys together. Yeah. Well, the Soviet Union was terrible. Yeah, but like, so are we. So, you know, I'm not really making moral judgments here. I'm just saying, like, China's shift is probably at least in part because of us. Still waging economic war on China, rather than just accepting that they, you know, benefit in a comparative advantage sense from their manufacturing economy. We have decided for the past 20 years we have waged this pointless war where every year manufacturing jobs in our country decline for obvious and economically inevitable reasons, and they increase in China, and then we decide that's China stealing our jobs. Like, it is a mathematical certainty that without like extraordinary tariffs or protectionist policies, manufacturing jobs would move to a country that has way more productive capabilities and much cheaper labor. But we have fought against this tooth and nail over and over. You know where we don't fight against this, by the way? You know how you know this fight is arbitrary? We didn't do the same thing with the American clothing industry. America used to produce its own textiles, Levi's and whatever. It was a big source of jobs here in America. Now, it's all Mexico, Bangladesh, whatever else. You don't hear about that much, do you? You know why? Because China didn't take those jobs. That wasn't the narrative. The narrative was manufacturing jobs. Even though a fuck ton of people were employed in textiles in the United States, we didn't decide to make an enemy out of that. Like, that wasn't the issue we decided to hang our hat up on. It's completely manufactured. I mean, the US did the same thing to Japan in the 80s that they did to China in the 2000s. Yeah! Literally, like, to this day, the cyberpunk aesthetic, the whole, like, you know, America is going to have, like kanji underneath every street sign because the world is going to be Japanified. That was, like, a literal threat. That was like an actual concern that people had back in the mid to late 80s because they thought Sony was going to invade the west coast of the United States or something. It was insane. We just want enemies, man. We just like enemies. We love having enemies. We're fucking evil. We keep creating enemies because we like enemies. Did the same thing with Iran. Did the same thing with Cuba. You know, we got along with Castro. Batista was such an incompetent ruler, even though he facilitated a bunch of American economic interests in Cuba, that when he was overthrown by Castro and his revolutionary militia, at first, Castro was on good terms with the United States. He visited our people, we visited him, there were mutual talks of cooperation. The understanding was that even though Castro was obviously more communist aligned, that he might be moderated by his proximity to the United States. Like, Castro might be ideologically Soviet, but geographically, he is America, right? So the idea was, maybe we could have him around as like a, you know, fair weather friend, right? But fucking nope. At the start, Castro was much more moderate and pro-America. Yeah, I wonder what fucking changed. Washington iced him out. At first, it was like, maybe we can get along with this guy. But then, like, the administrations changed. An American, I forget which president it was. It wasn't JFK. It was, so the next administration, the one following the one where Castro took over Batista, was it Eisenhower? I feel like it wasn't LBJ. No, I don't think it was LBJ. I think it might have been Eisenhower. I don't remember. I would have to reread the wiki article or whatever. But the point is, like, we got along with him. What changed was not Castro started hating the US. What changed was a shift in our foreign policy, and we decided to make an enemy of him. We did the same thing with Venezuela to a large extent. And Vietnam. We certainly did it with Iran. Wasn't there something like that with Ho Chi Minh as well? We're just Satan, man. We are the great Satan. There's a reason people say that, you know? It's really difficult to find some kind of, like, you know, beef between America and a foreign country that does not at its root, funnily enough, what's one country where this isn't really the case? North Korea. One of the few examples where the conditions that created North Korea and led to where it is now and why it is the way it is, not really our fault, Not saying we didn't have a hand in it, but like the Korean War, I think that you can lay a much more blame on China or Russia. No. We did Russia. We did Russia. That one's on us. Russia wanted to cooperate with the West after the fall of the Soviet Union. They were very eager to liberalize and democratize, or at least many people within the country were, but we actively facilitated the oligarchification of the country. We turned its resources over and allowed it to be taken over by former Soviet officials who the industry was carved up between. Sorry.
That are threatening the Islamic regime. Analysts say this time the protests feel different.
The fragility of the Iranian government.
It was the former Soviet officials that did most of the oligarch shit. Yeah, it was, but like we facilitated it. We allowed it to happen. We encouraged it to happen. We literally sent like envoys to the country encouraging all of it. Like we had a responsibility to steward the. Let me put it this way, okay? If the Cold War had gone a different way, and the Soviets won, and America collapsed, I mean full-on collapsed, the way that the Soviet Union did, I think that we all would understand in that moment that it would be the responsibility of the Soviet government to reach out in the interest of cooperation and attempt to stabilize, normalize, democratize, whatever else, the United States. And I think that to a large extent, there would have been like there would have been I don't want to say like an earnest effort there. The Soviets did genuinely try to reach out to countries they had ideological parallels with. So it's kind of like it kind of varies. I think that we would at the very least agree it's a good thing for them to have done, right? We inflamed the situation in Russia after the Soviet Union collapsed. We made it much worse, like they were in a very delicate place, and we deliberately pressed on all the nerve endings, all of the little incentives that facilitated what we live with now.
The Iranian regime is, I think, at its highest when we talk about fragility, because also economically and in terms of the number of people on the streets, the diversity of the people on the street. I would say this is the closest I have personally witnessed the potentiality of the end.
On Saturday,
why did Ukraine turn out different? It kind of didn't. I mean, what do you mean? Ukraine has, for the most part, been a pretty like failed country up until the end. Like they also were victimized by the shock doctrine. They were economically like looted both by Soviet officials and by American investors and industrialists. They had a non-functioning democracy that was largely co-opted by the Russian sphere of influence. Only recently have they started to express actual national autonomy, and that's just because Russia was stupid enough to fucking poke the bear, the other smaller bear.
Revolutionary Guard said they will protect the revolution's achievements amid threats of retaliation. This is the country's attorney general just warned that those continuing to protest will be considered an enemy of God, a charge that carries the death penalty. These statements coming after Washington declared the U.S. supports the brave people of Iran. Human rights groups have denounced the deadly crackdown in which dozens of people have been killed and more than 2,300 people arrested.
2,300, damn. Well, we'll see how it goes, I suppose. All right, last one that I'm watching. I've been so focused on my own country falling apart.
A new image to spur the waves of protesters who continue to flood Iran's streets. A municipal building burning into the night in Karaj, just outside Tehran. The regime safeguarding the achievement.
Nah, I think I got the gist of it, to be honest. Look, I totally support the protests. I just really, really, really hope the Iranian people are able to keep the West's hands off themselves.